Hi, everybody. Welcome to Chronicle Live, presented by Autotrader.com. Scott Reese with you for the next hour, in for Greg Papa, who is feeling under the weather. But boy, do I get a good day to do the show. We got a lot to talk about and a lot of guests forthcoming. Let's get right out of the gate with the big news of the day. This just within the last couple of hours, as we introduce our panel of guests and experts. Legal analyst Steve Moskowitz with us, and Cam Inman, Paul Gutierrez. And gentlemen, we'll get your thoughts momentarily on this new Randy Hansen saga. But Steve, you know, just when we thought the Raiders were one big, happy, dysfunctional family, the Hansen Cable story rears its ugly head again. We've got a civil suit coming now.
Yes, we do.
How does this differ from the criminal almost lawsuit?
A lot of difference. Criminal, the penalty is you can go to prison for a long time. Civil is about money, and there's also a different standard of proof. In a criminal suit, you have a much higher standard of proof to show someone is guilty, as opposed to a civil suit, which can be 51-49.
Now, that said, you know, there were supposedly inconsistencies in the story the first time around, which is why the DA didn't file criminal charges.
Exactly.
How are these inconsistencies going to be mitigated, even with a lesser standard of proof?
As an attorney, I'd much rather be on Coach Cable's side, because normally when you have an allegation like this, it's a he said, she said, who knows who was there. Here, we have on the record 3 coaches. There were 5 people in the room, the accuser, the accused, and 3 coaches, and the 3 coaches said it never happened. That's the problem that you have with this type.
It seems to be a big problem.
I think it's a big problem. That's the problem, when you have the only people that were there say it didn't happen. So that is going to be the terrible problem for Randy and his lawsuit.
Does this affect in any way his employment with the team? I mean, he's back as a Raider employee, albeit not a coach. He's in the personnel office, but still, it's not like the team can just say, all right, well, now we don't like you anymore and get rid of him, right? Because now they got to keep the status quo.
They can't do that because he has certain protections under the labor law, but I just have a psychic feeling that something's going to be happening, that he's not going to be there for the rest of his career.
Really?
Just a thought, just a thought.
Wow, that's what the crystal ball...
That's what the crystal ball...
The crystal
we had it in the
Chronicle
office right before I came over,
yeah. All right, gentlemen, Cam, Paul, you guys have obviously covered this story since its inception last fall during football season. Now it lingers on well into the offseason. Cam, your reaction to the news today, first of all?
I don't think it's surprising. I think everybody expected it when the first allegations came out. The only drama that we're following throughout the season was whether Coach Cable would get suspended or not. He didn't. Lasted throughout as coach, and apparently he still is the coach. But Steve, one thing I wanted to ask you was when the DA came out and talked about the case, and he held that press conference and got into some of the details, and he said, possible this constituted misdemeanor assault, and he said, but I'm not going to press that case. He said some things that made me think, well, it looked like he had some evidence there. Now, can they use what the DA said in that case? Does that help Randy Hansen at all?
If I was a defense attorney, what I would say is that's mere speculation and conjecture. You know, I can imagine what happened. If you have some altercation with somebody, if I wasn't there, I can imagine what happened. But that's not evidence, somebody's imagination, and the burden of proof is on the plaintiff.
I guess the obvious question is, if Randy Hansen is planning to, as many of us expected, initiate a civil suit, why is he going back to work for the team?
Well, that was kind of the bizarre thing when this whole thing unfolded, was when he was not welcomed back to the organization. Then he was brought back in December when everything was kind of going good for the team. They bring him back, and it kind of becomes this huge elephant in the room. But at the time, when the Napa DA declined to press the formal charges against him, I remember Randy Hansen's attorney saying that a civil suit was on its way, and we're all going to find out that Tom Cable's not a very nice guy. And then the ESPN report came. So this isn't surprising at all. I don't think that it's coming out. What's surprising is the timing, because supposedly he was back in good graces with the Raiders. Could they have possibly been trying to negotiate something, Stephen? And maybe they told him, get out, scram, kid, now we're tired of you, and now here comes the suit?
I am sure there was a backroom deal, because almost always the lawyers are going to get together and say, look, I want X and I'm going to sue you. And I'm sure there were backroom negotiations, and I believe the lawsuit was filed when the negotiations broke down. That's how it almost always happens.
And again, we should be clear, the lawsuit not just against Tom Cable,
Yes.
he is also suing the Raiders organization, so there's a whole other wrinkle to
Sure,
this.
and the reason you do that is you allege that the employer had a duty to keep a safe work environment, and that was violated. You always throw that in.
And meanwhile, we've sort of been led to believe that Al Davis was a big Randy Hansen fan. And
Not
now
anymore.
Randy Hansen turns around
Not
and is
anymore.
suing Al, right?
Yeah, if you're going to sue Al, you're probably not so much, but he's used to it maybe. I think, you know, if they brought him back during the season, though, I mean, you know, they brought him back for a reason to help the Raiders, and that he's preached all along, that he is a big fan of the Raiders and always wants to do anything for the Raiders. By suing them, I think he's probably just covering his own, you know what, you know, in case they say you're out of there, and he wants to make sure he gets some kind of financial support on the way.
And so now the Raiders will have to come out completely in support of Tom Cable, right? Solidarity against Randy Hansen. So we haven't even gone on record to say, hey, he's our guy, he's going to be our coach, right? But they've got to be in the same corner now, don't they?
But they never did that in the first place.
Yeah, they're not going to
They never did that in the first place. When this whole thing broke in training camp in August, you never heard anything. I think the closest Al Davis came to supporting Tom Cable at that time was he was asked at the press conference when Richard Seymour was announced. And the closest Al Davis ever came to supporting Tom Cable was, well, I hope that's not the case. So, and it just kind of went from there.
You know, I don't think we're going to see Tom Cable stand in front of a podium with a blue curtain backdrop apologizing for what he did to Randy Hansen. You know, they're becoming in vogue. I don't think that's going to ever happen. We're not going to see, I don't think we're going to see any comment out of Cable or the Raiders out of this.
All right, so Steve, take us through a timeline. What are we looking at here? When can we expect this to move along?
It's going to depend on the court's calendar, and also a lot of times the attorneys will ask for more time to work something out. Lawsuits take a while, and there's a lot of negotiations. There's also a lot of discovery where people go to witnesses, have depositions, have written questions to find out what's going on in the case. Also, there's a standing order by the judges where the attorneys have to meet and confer, talk about the case, see if they can settle. The other thing is, when there's a lawsuit, a lot of times there's a lot of elements. You see, can you possibly settle any of the elements? Can you reduce anything? Because essentially, if you have to go to the court, that's the last resort.
And so we're talking about months.
Oh, I think a lot longer than that, unless there's a settlement.
Which means that this could well go into next football season. And again,
Very
we've got,
easily.
you know, complications and
Well, that might get additional interest in the Raiders.
yeah. Did it work last
Maybe
year?
good.
I don't know.
Well, you know,
Interest for the wrong reason.
It could have a trickle-down effect throughout the NFL, though, if something ever is decided upon by a jury or whatever. You know, people are going to be cracking down. Coaches, you can't be hitting each other. I'm sure they've gotten that message already.
Let me write that down just so I remember
Thank you very
that.
much. Same as co-hosts.
Don't
and
hit,
things
right,
like
yeah.
that.
All right. Steve Moskowitz, we appreciate the legal insight into the latest chapter of the Hansen Cable Raiders.
Sure,
saga.
we'll have some additional chapters.
I am sure we will. All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Guys, stick around. Right now, we're going to talk a little baseball. It's a news flash from spring training in